I used to believe silence was the sound of peace, but the morning I emptied my closet, it felt like standing inside a vacuum that kept swallowing pieces of me. It was strange how letting go of things seemed to tighten something inside instead of loosening it. Can emptiness heal, or does it just echo louder? I told myself I was searching for clarity, but the bare floorboards and blank walls looked more like a confession I wasn't ready to read. The sun slid across the room as if trying to warm what I had already stripped cold. I kept wondering why simplicity felt so heavy in my hands, why every object I discarded tugged at a thread I didn't know was attached to my heart. This was supposed to be the beginning of freedom, yet all I felt was a quiet I didn't trust. I kept decluttering anyway, hoping the emptiness would eventually tell me something true. The house felt lighter, but I didn't. I kept telling myself that clarity was just one more box away, one more drawer emptied, one more layer stripped back until I finally reached the core of myself. Yet every time I dropped another item into a bag, something inside me tightened as if resisting a truth I didn't want to face. Mia's voice drifted through the quiet rooms, asking if I wanted tea, but her softness felt too close, too knowing. I answered without looking at her, afraid she might see the confusion I barely understood. It was strange how the more space I created, the less room I felt I had to breathe. I wondered if I had mistaken emptiness for healing, or if I was simply trying to outrun the clutter inside me by erasing everything around. I kept sorting through drawers like the answers were buried somewhere between old receipts and forgotten trinkets. Jonas called earlier, asking if I was okay. I said I was fine, too busy cleaning to talk. He laughed at first, then paused as if realizing something wasn't funny. When I hung up, the silence felt heavier than before. I sat on the floor surrounded by piles of things that once meant something, wondering when I stopped letting myself feel anything at all. The air in the room tasted of dust and indecision. It was unsettling how easy it was to detach from what once brought comfort. Maybe I was afraid that holding onto these objects meant holding onto pieces of myself I didn't trust anymore. Maybe I thought losing them would make it easier to forget everything else. Mia watched me clearing shelves with a tenderness that made my chest tighten. She didn't ask why I needed to get rid of so much. She just stood nearby as if waiting for a moment when I might let her in. I kept pretending this was about simplifying my life, not realizing how complicated I was making everything between us. I tried to ignore the way her presence softened the sharp edges inside me. When she reached out to pick up a small frame I had set aside, I felt a jolt of panic, like I had been caught trying to erase something sacred. She didn't say anything, but her silence carried a question I wasn't ready to answer. I wondered how long she could watch me disappear piece by piece before she realized I no longer knew how to stay. By evening, the house felt strangely unfamiliar, as if I were walking through someone else's life. I kept opening cabinets even though I already knew they were empty. The stillness settled into my bones. Mia sat on the couch watching me wander from room to room like I was searching for something I'd lost without realizing it. Maybe I was. Jonas texted again, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner. I told him I was busy, but the truth was the idea of being around someone who could see through me felt unbearable. I pressed my palm to the smooth wall, trying to steady the rising unease. Minimalism was supposed to bring clarity, yet the more space I created, the more crowded my mind became with everything I wasn't willing to face. Mia started moving through the house more quietly, as if afraid her footsteps might disturb whatever fragile search I was tangled in. I watched her sometimes, noticing the way her hands hesitated before touching anything I hadn't already decided to remove. It felt like she was navigating a museum of someone slipping away. Jonas called again, his voice carrying that mix of concern and frustration only old friends can manage. I kept insisting everything was fine, that I was simplifying, that I finally understood what mattered. But the more I said it, the less convincing it sounded even to me. A strange distance settled in the air between me and the people I loved, not loud or sudden, but slow and creeping, like mist swallowing a familiar path. I didn't know when the drift began, only that it had grown enough for everyone to feel it except me. Until now. I told myself I was being productive when I sorted through old memories again, but the truth was, I didn't know what to do with the feelings that came up when I held them. It was easier to toss something into a box than to admit I didn't know how to carry the weight of what it represented. Jonas dropped by unannounced, stepping into the near-empty living room with raised brows. He looked around and let out a low whistle that wasn't admiration. When he asked if I was okay, really okay, I felt something tighten in my throat. I shrugged it off, insisting I needed space, but space wasn't the issue. It was what echoed inside it. Jonas lingered in the doorway longer than usual, as if deciding whether to push further or let me pretend I had everything under control. He chose kindness. I didn't deserve it. Nights were the hardest. The house, once filled with little sounds. Mia humming in the kitchen, the soft shuffle of books being moved, Jonas dropping by without warning, had become so still, I could hear my own heartbeat echo against the walls. I lay awake wondering if this was what clarity felt like, or if I'd stripped away so much that I no longer recognized myself. Mia slept curled on her side, turned away from me not out of anger, but exhaustion. I wanted to reach for her, say something that would bridge the quiet widening between us, but the words tangled before they ever reached my lips. Instead, I stayed on my side of the bed, staring at shadows on the ceiling and wondering if I had mistaken the act of emptying my home for healing my heart. By now, Mia had stopped asking why I needed to clear so much. Instead, she began asking if I wanted company while I did it. I didn't know how to answer. Being near her made the deep ache in my chest harder to ignore. I started finding comfort in tasks that kept my hands busy and my thoughts numb. Folding, sorting, discarding, repeating. When she reached out one evening and touched my arm, I felt both the warmth I missed and the fear I'd been hiding from. She whispered that I didn't have to do this alone. I almost told her that was the problem. That part of me believed I did, but the words wouldn't come. I just nodded, pretending the silence between us wasn't getting thicker by the day. Jonas sent me a message that simply read, "You don't seem like yourself lately." It lingered in my mind all day. I wandered through the house, noticing the absence of things I once touched daily. A mug from a trip, a book Mia gave me, a jacket Jonas lent me years ago. I told myself I didn't need them anymore, but the hollow feeling in my chest disagreed. The emptiness wasn't peaceful. It was loud, pressing into the spaces I had tried to free. I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, unsure what I was trying to accomplish anymore. The quiet felt like a mirror, reflecting everything I had refused to say out loud. Maybe this wasn't clarity at all. Maybe it was loneliness disguised as simplicity. The house had become so quiet that even my breathing felt intrusive. I woke before dawn one morning and walked through the hollow rooms, listening to the soft creak of the floor beneath my feet. It struck me how different the silence felt now, less like peace and more like a truth I had been trying to outrun. I opened a drawer I had emptied days earlier, hoping to find something I had missed, but it held nothing except the cold reminder of what I had chosen to let go. Mia watched me from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her expression soft but worried. I felt her eyes on me, but I couldn't meet them. For the first time, I wondered if I had gone too far. The emptiness I had created didn't feel like clarity anymore. It felt like a warning. I tried to distract myself by rearranging the few things I had left, but the act felt pointless. There was nothing left to shift, nothing left to move aside. The more I tried to fill the morning with tasks, the more I felt the walls closing in. Jonas came over after work, stepping inside with a cautious hesitance that wasn't like him. He asked if I wanted to go out, maybe get dinner or breathe in some air that wasn't thick with what I refused to admit. I told him I wasn't up for it. But he didn't leave. right away. Instead, he stood there, studying me the way he used to when we were young and I tried to hide something painful. It made me feel exposed. And I realized I didn't have the courage to keep pretending I was okay. That night I couldn't sleep. The darkness felt thick, swallowing the corners of the room. I sat on the floor in the living room, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whisper of wind brushing the windows. It was strange how loud the world became when there was nothing left to soften it. My thoughts rushed in like a tide I had been keeping at bay. I realized then that I had been decluttering not to simplify my life, but to avoid it. I didn't want to feel the grief I had pushed away for years, the fear of not being enough, the growing distance between me and Mia. I stared at my empty surroundings and wondered how I had mistaken this hollowness for healing. For the first time, the silence scared me. Mia found me in the morning, still sitting where I'd been the night before. Her voice was quiet when she asked if I had slept at all. I shook my head, unable to explain the heaviness pressing against my chest. She sat beside me, not touching me, but close enough for me to feel her warmth. For a moment, I thought I might break open and spill every truth I'd been holding back. But the words stayed tangled inside me. She told me she missed the version of me who used to laugh, who used to let her in without hesitation. Hearing that felt like being scraped raw. I realized then that the person she missed had been slipping away long before the house emptied. Maybe long before I even noticed. Later that afternoon, I walked into the bedroom and stood in the middle of the empty floor, feeling the weight of everything I had avoided. The sunlight moved slowly across the wall, marking time I hadn't been paying attention to. I realized my life had become a series of clean surfaces and quiet rooms, but none of it had brought me closer to understanding myself. I thought minimalism would help me shed what was unnecessary, but instead it stripped away the parts of my life that held meaning. I felt the ache of loneliness rising, thick and undeniable. Something inside me finally cracked. I knew I couldn't keep pretending the emptiness was peaceful. It wasn't. It was a reflection of the fear I had built my life around. That evening I sat alone in the living room, feeling like a stranger inside the life I had created. The walls looked too clean, the air too still, and every quiet second pressed against me like a truth I didn't want to face. I tried to remember what I had hoped minimalism would fix, but the reasons felt hazy now, buried under layers of avoidance. Mia moved through the space with careful steps, as if afraid the smallest sound might shatter me. When she asked if I wanted to talk, something inside me twisted. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to admit that the emptiness wasn't soothing anymore. It was exposing parts of me I had spent years hiding. I had stripped the rooms to their bones, and now it felt like I had done the same to myself, without knowing how to put anything back. Jonas arrived unexpectedly the next morning, his expression already telling me he sensed something deeper was wrong. He asked if I wanted to take a walk, and for once, I didn't argue. Outside, the cold air felt sharp against my skin, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in months. We walked in silence at first, our footsteps crunching against gravel. Eventually, he asked why I'd been shutting everyone out. I opened my mouth, but the truth felt too big to say. I told him I needed clarity, but he shook his head gently, saying clarity doesn't come from running away. Hearing that hurt, mostly because it was true. For the first time, I realized I had been hiding behind simplicity, using it as a shield to avoid confronting the mess inside me. When I returned home, the house felt heavier than before, as if it were waiting for me to finally acknowledge something I had tried to ignore. Mia watched me carefully, studying the way my shoulders slumped, and my eyes drifted towards spaces that once held pieces of our life together. She asked if I wanted to sit with her. I hesitated, then nodded. She told me she felt like she was losing me, not because of the objects I threw away, but because I seemed to be scraping away parts of myself too. Hearing her voice crack made something inside me split open. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what I had done, not just to myself, but to her. I realized then that simplicity had become an excuse to disappear. That night, I sat alone in the bedroom, staring at the empty space where a dresser once stood. I tried to imagine what life looked like before I stripped everything away, but the memories felt distant, blurred by months of avoidance. I realized I hadn't been chasing simplicity. I had been fleeing from the parts of myself I didn't want to confront. The fear of not being enough, the pressure to stay composed, the weight of emotions I didn't know how to hold. Removing things had felt easier than facing all of that. But now the emptiness no longer protected me. It mirrored every doubt I carried. I felt myself unraveling, not in the way I feared, but in a way that made honesty unavoidable. Maybe this breakdown wasn't the end, but the doorway I had been avoiding. As the night deepened, I walked through each room slowly, touching the few objects that remained. A cup, a blanket, a single photograph. They felt heavier than they ever had, as if they carried all the weight I had tried to avoid. I realized then that minimalism had never been the problem. It was the way I used it. As a hiding place. A quiet corner where I didn't have to admit how lost I felt. Mia stood in the hallway watching me, her eyes soft with worry, but also something like hope. I felt a pull inside me, gentle yet insistent, urging me to stop running. I wasn't sure how to fix what I had broken, but for the first time I wanted to try. I knew that facing myself was the only way back to the person I had been slipping away from. Mia approached me that morning with a softness that made everything inside me tremble. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly, her eyes holding a quiet ache I had tried not to see for months. She didn't raise her voice or ask for explanations. Instead, she told me she missed us, the version of us that laughed in grocery aisles and stayed up late talking about nothing. She said she felt like she had been living beside a ghost, someone drifting further away each day. Hearing that felt like being cracked open along a line I didn't know existed. I wanted to defend myself, to say I was trying to become better, clearer, lighter. But the truth landed heavily. In trying to shed everything, I had shed parts of us too. And there was no minimalist way to fix that. Jonas stopped by later, unannounced as usual. But this time, he didn't bother pretending everything was fine. He walked through the house slowly, looking at the empty rooms with an expression that combined disbelief and concern. When he turned to face me, there was no judgment, only worry so deep it made my throat tighten. He told me he felt like he was losing the friend he grew up with, the one who used to call him at midnight to confess their fears, instead of hiding behind silence. I didn't know how to explain the weight I had been carrying, or how I had convinced myself that removing everything would somehow make me lighter. Jonas didn't ask me to fix anything. He just asked me to stop disappearing. It was such a simple request, and somehow the hardest one to face. That evening, Mia and I sat on the couch in a silence that felt different from the ones before. This one wasn't distant. It was full, heavy with everything we hadn't said. She told me she felt abandoned long before the house emptied. She said she tried to reach me, tried to understand, tried to hold on even when I seemed to be slipping through her hands. I listened, each word sinking deeper than I expected. I hadn't realized how deeply my retreat had cut her. I thought I was protecting myself by simplifying, by clearing space so I could breathe. But hearing her speak made me realize I had been building a wall, not a sanctuary. And in doing so, I had pushed away the person who had been trying hardest to stay. I stayed up late after Mia went to bed, pacing through the hallway and touching the walls as if trying to feel my way back into my own life. I had spent months convincing myself that less meant better, that emptiness meant healing. But now all I could see were the gaps left behind. Spaces where laughter used to echo, where shared moments once lived. I realized that in my attempt to erase the noise, I had muted the people who mattered most. I sat on the floor and let the weight of it wash over me. For the first time, the tears came freely. They weren't just for what I had lost, but for what I had been too stubborn to see. I finally understood the cost of chasing clarity without connection. The next morning, I found Mia sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked up when I entered, eyes tired but open. I sat across from her, feeling the distance and the closeness all at once. For the first time in months, I tried to speak honestly. I told her I hadn't meant to disappear. I told her I thought decluttering would make me stronger, but instead it exposed how fragile I was. She listened quietly, and I could feel the weight of my words landing between us. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her voice was soft, breaking in places. She said she just wanted me back, not the version that chased perfection, but the one who allowed himself to be held. And I realized that was the part of me I had been running from the most. March. The days that followed felt quieter, but no longer in the way that made my chest tighten. Instead, there was a fragile stillness, like the house was holding its breath while waiting to see what I would do next. I found myself standing in rooms I had emptied, wondering what belonged there. Not because it looked nice or served a purpose, but because it carried meaning. Mia didn't hover, but she stayed close, moving through our home with a gentleness that reminded me how much of her I had taken for granted. I started picking up small objects I had set aside. A book she once read to me on a rainy night, a bowl Jonas made years ago, a scarf from a trip we took when everything felt lighter. Holding each piece felt like rediscovering parts of myself I had locked away. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of filling the space again. One afternoon, Mia joined me in the bedroom as I tried to decide what to bring back into the space. She didn't offer advice or try to guide me. She just sat on the edge of the bed, watching with a softness that made it easier to breathe. I picked up the photo frame I had once nearly thrown away and studied it for the longest time. I realized I had been afraid of what it represented. Proof of a life lived, of moments I couldn't control, of love I didn't always know how to hold. Maya walked over quietly and placed her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. In that moment, I felt something shift. Minimalism was no longer about erasing. It was about choosing what mattered enough to stay. Jonas stopped by again, but this time he found me sitting at the table with a small stack of belongings instead of empty countertops. Wah! He raised an eyebrow in that way he always did when he wasn't sure if he should tease me or hug me. I told him I was trying to rebuild, not the house, but myself. He didn't say much, just sat down beside me and picked up an old watch I had almost discarded. He reminded me of the night he gave it to me, how we stayed out too late and laughed until our stomachs hurt. The memory warmed something inside me. I realized then that simplicity didn't require abandoning the past. It meant choosing the pieces that held truth. Jonas smiled. A real one this time, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was coming home to myself. As days passed, I began placing objects back with intention, slowly, carefully, choosing only what made me feel anchored. There was a strange relief in allowing myself to reclaim parts of my life rather than hide from them. Mia noticed the shift. She moved beside me as I arranged a few books on the shelf, her arms brushing occasionally in small, comforting passes. She asked if I felt better. I told her I didn't feel fixed, but I felt present, and that was something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. She smiled gently, and it felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter. I realized that rebuilding wasn't about restoring what once was. It was about shaping something honest, something I was finally willing to show up for. One night, after Mia had gone to bed, I walked through the living room with a softness I hadn't felt in a long time. The space felt lighter now. Not because it was empty, but because it finally reflected choices instead of fear. I paused in front of the shelf and touched each object slowly, remembering why I kept it. A memory, a friend, a moment worth holding. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like a warning. It felt like room to breathe. I sat on the floor, letting the warmth of the lamp fall across me, and realized I wasn't running anymore. The emptiness I had once chased was never the answer. Presence was. And as I sat there, surrounded by enough, not too much, not too little, I felt something settle inside me that had been restless for far too long. The morning light felt different now. Softer somehow, as if the house itself had finally exhaled with me. I walked into the living room and stood in front of the shelf that once represented everything I feared. Now it held only what mattered. And even those few objects felt more like anchors than burdens. Mia joined me moments later. Still sleepy, her presence warm and familiar. She didn't ask what I was thinking. She just slipped her arm around my waist and I leaned into her without hesitation. For the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel like something I needed to escape. It felt like a foundation, one I could build a life on, not hide inside. I realized then that simplicity wasn't about the absence of things. It was about making room for the kind of love that stays even when you try to push it away. Later that day, I found myself in the hallway, looking at the blank wall I once considered a symbol of control. Now, it felt like a clean page, waiting for something real. Not decorative, not performative, just honest. Mia joined me with a small framed photo in her hand, one I had nearly thrown away. She asked if I wanted to hang it back up. I nodded, surprising myself with how natural it felt to want something on the wall again. As I held the frame, I realized I wasn't afraid of memories anymore. I wasn't afraid of weight. I was finally learning the difference between clutter and meaning. When we hung the photo together, it didn't feel like adding something back. It felt like choosing to stay present with who I was becoming. Jonas dropped by unexpectedly, but this time his expression softened when he stepped inside. He looked around the room, taking in the small but meaningful changes. The objects returned with intention, the warmth restored in the space. He gave me a smile that wasn't concerned or hesitant, just genuine. We sat at the table and I told him I'd been wrong about what I thought simplicity meant. He didn't lecture or remind me of the months I spent pushing people away. He just listened, nodding slowly, letting me speak without rushing. When he finally said he was proud of me, something inside me settled. I realized healing wasn't loud or dramatic. It was found in moments like this, in the quiet acknowledgement that I was no longer hiding from myself. As the sun dipped lower, Mia and I sat on the floor together, surrounded by a few items we both loved. We talked quietly about the months behind us, not with blame, but with understanding. She told me she had felt afraid of losing me to a version of myself that didn't know how to stay. I apologized, not out of guilt, but because I finally understood the weight of what she carried while I drifted away. She placed her hand over mine, and for the first time I didn't pull away or tense up. I let the connection sit between us, warm and steady. It felt like the beginning of something softer, something I didn't need to control. Simplicity wasn't about empty rooms. It was about making space for this tenderness, this honesty, this quiet return to each other. That night, after Mia had fallen asleep, I stood at the window looking out at the quiet street. The reflection staring back at me didn't look like someone who had it all figured out, but it did look like someone willing to keep trying. The house behind me wasn't full, but it wasn't empty either. It held enough meaning, enough memory, enough softness. I realized minimalism had never been about stripping life bare. It was about learning to choose with intention, learning to stay when things got uncomfortable, learning to make room for the people and moments that shaped me. As I turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle gently around me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not clarity, not perfection, just peace, quiet, steady, and finally, real.